I'm Eck Music, your host for today's program on Friday, April the 14th, 2006. And our guest today is Jim Coulter, and we're going to talk about wine again, except today it's going to be centered upon the casual wine drinker, the person that isn't necessarily into all of what different wines are and so forth. And so, Jim, let's start out by being very basic. What kinds of wines do we have? The whites, the reds, and then we'll take it from there.
Well, you've got three kinds of wines, basically. Or we'll be even more simple than that. There's two kinds of wines. There's sparkling wine and there's non-sparkling wine. And then within each of those categories, there's red and white.
Okay.
And then within each of those, you can break it down by the type of grapes that it's made
Well,
from.
let's talk a little bit about the whites first.
Okay, you've got a whole category of white wines, but and I think there's a graphic up on the screen now. Basically, the most popular kind, starting from driest to sweetest, is the Sauvignon Blanc, which is the primary grape of Bordeaux in France, the white Bordeaux. Sauvignon Blanc, then you have Pinot Grigio and Pinot Gris, which most people are familiar with Pinot Grigio. You have the Soave, which is a very popular Italian wine. Then from there you'd go up to Chardonnay, which is one of my favorites, which is probably the most popular wine grape in the world these days. And after that, the next level up on sweetness would be a grape called Viognier, which is from a small area of France, but it's spreading around the world. And recently there was an article in the paper that indicated that Virginia is one of the primary areas in the world where the Viognier grape grows well. So I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that in the future.
Jim, let me go back, staying on the whites for a minute. In general terms, what is the difference between those the different brands, or the description that you've just given us there, as far as taste is concerned?
Well,
if there is a distinction,
there is a distinction between some of them, and others it's very subtle. But the Sauvignon Blanc, for example, is characterized by kind of a grassy or herbal kind of taste. Most people are probably familiar with Chardonnay, which tends to be kind of rich and a little oaky and vanilla tasting. At the opposite end of that, the Viognier and the Riesling tend to be more toward honey or slightly sweet. The other grapes in between, the Pinot Grigio tends more towards Sauvignon Blanc as far as being dry, but without the herbal or grassy character. It doesn't have a whole lot of distinguishing characteristics. The Pinot Gris is another one like the Pinot Grigio. The Pinot Blanc is another one. Pretty fairly bland taste by themselves.
Okay. Well, let's get into the reds a little bit. Go over the same categories now. What's the distinction there? I know it's subtle at times, but what are the differences?
Probably the biggest the biggest distinction in the red wines would be between wines like a Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the king of the red wine grapes, despite what people from France will tell you about the Pinot Noir, which is the red Burgundy grape. The Pinot Noir tends to be a lighter style of wine, whereas the Cabernet Sauvignon is fuller and has more of some bitter tannins in them, which is one of the reasons why Cabernet Sauvignons can age for 20 years or so to let those tannins soften until the wine becomes more drinkable. You have quite a few other red wines. You have Zinfandel, which is a big grape in California, which makes a big, powerful alcoholic very fruity type of red wine. Then another grape that's popular nowadays is the Shiraz, which is came to great popularity in Australia. It's one of their primary red wine grapes, and it's now being grown throughout most of the grape growing world.
Okay, let's get down to what should the just the casual wine drinker, what would be a basic wine or wines that he should have or she should have in their home, not only for themselves but for the occasionally when they entertain. If somebody drops in and they might want to serve a glass of wine, what would you recommend there that they have as a basic stock?
Well, I would recommend, and again, it varies depending on the individual and how much wine they drink, whether they take wine with them to the dining room each evening like I do. But if you just want to have some wine in your apartment for friends or relatives come on the weekend to visit, you want to serve them a glass of wine, my recommendations for a red wine would be a Merlot, because it goes with just about anything that you can serve a red wine with. A Merlot will accommodate that. It's a very flexible grape. And for the white wine, a Chardonnay, because most people that will drink wine find those two to be probably the most acceptable, and as far as foods go, they're the most forgiving as far as clashing with foods and so forth.
Now, how about storage? Again, the casual wine drinker, they might have a bottle that's going to last them for months, maybe.
Yeah. Well,
is that a problem at all with either one that you mentioned?
Yeah, I would say first of all, if you're gonna buy wine, if you have a car and you go shopping, you can pretty much buy wine what you want when you want it. If, like a lot of our residents, you depend on the shopping shuttle to take you over to, for example, Trader Joe's or Giant, I would recommend that you have 3 or 4 bottles of wine, 2 reds and 2 whites is about all most people could comfortably carry on the bus. And when you get them home, store them in the coolest, darkest place that you have in your apartment. For some people, that might be an interior closet that doesn't back up to one of the heating units. Best place that I've found for storing wine, if you don't have a real wine cellar, is put it under your bed. Most people have a bedspread that hangs down, which protects it from sunlight. Bedroom is usually the coolest place. It's on the floor, since warm air rises. The floor is the coolest thing, and it's not going to get disturbed under there unless that's where you're storing your shoes or extra clothes under there. Push 4 or 5 bottles of wine under the foot of the bed and leave it there, and it's easy to get to when you need it.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Now, how about should the whites? The whites should be normally served cool, or should they be served at room temperature? The reds, what about that?
Well, that's one of the nice things about Chardonnay, and that's one of the reasons I recommend it for things like this, is because Chardonnay tastes best when it's slightly chilled. Maybe 4 hours before you're going to serve it, put it in the refrigerator, and it'll be fine. But if it's not chilled, or if you've drank up all your chilled wine, Chardonnay tastes wonderful just at room temperature. Okay. And red wines, if you have a chance, a bottle of Merlot, I'd put it in the refrigerator maybe an hour before you're going to open it.
Oh, really? So red you would actually cool also?
Just to get it slightly chilled, because red wine is ideally served at about 65, 60 degrees, which is what they call cellar temperature, which of course in medieval Europe was 55, 60 degrees. So if you put it in the refrigerator an hour before you open it, it'll be fine. But again, that's with really good wines. The kinds of wines I'm recommending that most of us here at Green Spring buy are the $5 and $6 bottles of wine. And they're not they're not made the way they make them in Europe. So if you're buying a California or Australian wine, why it'll probably be fine just right out from under the bed at 70 degrees.
Well, now, what happens if you open a bottle of wine and you don't, for example, a white, a Chardonnay, and you don't finish it when you're with your guests? What should you do with what's left in that bottle?
Well, that's
outside of drinking it
yes,
right away.
I was going to say you're probably asking the wrong person because I drink it. But you can put the stopper back in it, put the cork back in, and put it in the refrigerator, and take it to if there's enough left, take it into the dining room the next night and have the waiter or waitress bring you a glass, and you can finish it up with your dinner. It's
But what if you don't do that? How long can you leave it sitting around and it won't spoil, or does that vary?
It varies, but what my recommendation would be is if you have an open bottle of wine, put the cork back in it, put it in the refrigerator overnight. If it's a red wine, take it out a couple hours before you're going to drink it. If you're going to keep it more than a day, find yourself one of these little plastic water bottles, a 500 milliliter or 350 milliliter water bottle, and pour it in there and just screw the cap back on. Because the thing you don't want is you don't want it exposed to air. And if you pour it into a smaller bottle, and you've seen these little small bottles you get on the airplane, or the half bottles you can buy in the wine store. A lot of people for happy hour over at Hunter's Crossing will pour wine into those smaller bottles, and they'll bring one little bottle 1 week and the other half the next week.
Well, that leads me to the next question. When do you use a decanter for serving wine, or should you use a decanter?
That's a good question. If you have a really old wine with a lot of sediment in the bottom, so I'm talking 15, 20-year-old wine that's been properly stored, it's recommended that you decant it, which is that you carefully pour the wine out of the bottle into a decanter so that you don't have sediment mixed up in it. You leave a little bit of wine in the bottle with the sediment, and then you drink the wine from the decanter. Most of the wines that are sold in the United States nowadays are refined or filtered and fined so that there isn't a sediment, and they're made for drinking within 6 months of them being sold. So I don't think anyone here at Green Spring needs to worry about decanting wines. It looks really nice if you bring a crystal decanter with red wine in it to the table and so forth. And if you've got crystal decanters in your home, pour the wine in there and serve it from the decanter. But I don't think it's necessary as part of the wine serving business. But it certainly looks nice.
Okay, Jim, I'd like you now to talk a little bit about the bulk wines, the stuff you see that they're selling now in boxes and the large jugs.
Right.
How good are those, I guess, and what should you do with them as far as storing and handling it?
Well, they're great for places like Green Spring. If you're gonna be storing wine, if you're gonna be entertaining, you can, because the way that and I'm talking about box wines now. I don't recommend that anybody here buy the big jugs of wine simply because they're too hard to handle. If you've got a 3-liter bottle of wine, that's a pretty heavy thing to be picking up and pouring. But they have wines that come in boxes now that are 3 liters, and you can buy a 3-liter box of Chardonnay, for example, from California or Australia for about $15. And a 3-liter box is the equivalent of 4 bottles. So if you pay $16 for 3 liters, that works out to about $4 a bottle. And you can put that box on the shelf in your refrigerator, and it's got a little spigot on the side. And anytime you want a glass of wine, or if you're having a party, people just open the refrigerator, push the spigot, and pour themselves a glass of wine. And the way the boxes are constructed, it has a plastic bladder inside, and as the wine comes out, the air pressure collapses the bladder so that no air gets into the wine. So a box of that wine will last in your refrigerator for 6 or 7 months.
Now, I recognizing that we get into individual tastes on wine, but generally speaking, as far as your experience is concerned, on using a bulk wine, is it, do some of them have a better taste than others in your experience? You know, talk about your taste.
Yes.
Now you're into wines more so than many people, but do you personally drink a bulk wine occasionally?
Most of the wines that I drink, that I take, I buy them in bottles, but they're the same wine that, for example, there's a family-owned winery in California, Delicato, which I recommend to people here, and they sell their bottled wine for about $5.99 for a bottle of Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon, and you can buy it in a 3-liter box for about $15.99. But it's the same wine. It's made in the same process. The only difference is when it comes to bottling it, they bottle some in real bottles and they put the rest of it into the boxes. But the wine is the same.
Now, which company is that?
It's called Delicato, and there are others. Banrock Station from Australia is another large bulk wine producer that you see their wine in bottles and boxes.
And it's the same wine that you would buy in the bottle.
It's the same as in the bottle.
Now, does the box that it's stored in, that it's packaged in a box, does that have any effect on the taste versus a bottle?
I haven't.
That you can tell?
I haven't noticed it, and I admit that I haven't tasted it after it's been in the box. I mean, for 6 months. But the way they're made is the plastic bladder that's inside these boxes is a medical grade plastic, the same kind of stuff that if you're hooked up to an IV in the hospital, it's the same kind of plastic they use for the saline solution and so forth. So the plastic that they use in that is made for storing food products and medical products, so it's not supposed to, impart anything to the contents.
Any difference. Yeah.
And the people that I've read that have done tastings on it can't tell the difference.
Okay. And
I'm sure I couldn't.
Okay. Let's again. This is for the casual wine drinker and a person that doesn't serve it that often. What should they have in their house, in their apartment here, in the way of stemware, glasses, and serving deals? What if they went out today to get something, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think
the type of glass, for example.
That's a good question, because I'm sure a lot of people here already have stemware, and I would not recommend that they go out and buy new stemware. Use what they have. But if you don't have wine glasses, you've given them to the grandkids or the kids when you moved in here, and now you decide you want some, I would look for inexpensive glasses with a long enough stem that you can hold the stem in your hands with the bowl of the glass still above your fingers, and for about a 5 or 6 ounce size bowl. You can usually find stemware in these low cost places like IKEA and places like that for a couple of dollars a glass, and you could buy 8 glasses for $16 and probably wash them in your dishwasher and keep them on the shelf for when you have most of the apartments aren't big enough to have much more than 8 or 10 people in at once. So 8 or 10 glasses is probably plenty. And use the same glasses for red and for white, and for if you have champagne, put those in there too. You don't need special glasses for once a year occasion.
Okay, that leads me mentioning champagne. What would you suggest for a wine with desserts? In other words, if you invite somebody to your house afterwards to have a piece of pie or cake, and you'd also want to serve a wine, what would you suggest there that you have on hand?
Well, it would depend on what kind of cake or pie you were serving.
Well, you're getting pretty.
But for example, one of the classic combinations would be Cabernet Sauvignon or Merlot with chocolate, because of something about the chemical properties of the chocolate. And I know there's a lot of women here and some of the men who will tell you that you can't serve anything with chocolate. Just eat the chocolate itself.
Yeah, right.
But but red wine with chocolate is good if you're having a white cake or a yellow cake with white frosting, and you wanted to serve a wine with it. I would recommend you go with something a little sweeter for a dessert, like a Viognier or a Johannesburg Riesling. They sell California Rieslings and Australian and so forth. A Riesling is a type of grape, and it makes a sweeter wine than the normal table wine, and of
it
course,
complements with
complements the dessert. But probably most people here, if they're going to have people over for dessert, will probably serve coffee with it. But you could, if you have a little, you can buy half bottles of sherry. They have dessert sherry, like an Oloroso sherry, is nice with some desserts.
Now, is that a sweeter wine?
It's a sweeter wine, and again, sherry is just like wine. They have dry, medium, sweet, very sweet. You could serve port, which again is a heavier, sweeter thing, but But if we're just talking about serving something basic from your cellar, most people probably aren't going to have those in their cellar. No. Although having a bottle of sherry or port around is nice because you can use it for cooking too if you're cooking a meal for somebody.
Now, Jim, I noticed the other day reading something in one of the papers that, which frankly I never thought about it, but there are kosher wines out.
Yes.
And
Passover.
Talk a little bit about that.
Well, it's kosher wines are no different than any other wine as far as I understand. I haven't made a big study of kosher wines, but I have some friends who drink kosher wine, and my understanding is the process for making it is exactly the same as for other wine, but it's made under the supervision of a rabbi, so that it strictly adheres to the kosher rules of food, and because wine is considered a food.
Yeah, so it'd be the same principle as far as the food is concerned. Right. The wine is under the supervision of someone. Yeah, fine. Another thing that comes up occasionally and hopping around a little bit now is on when you talk about a white wine. I've heard it said that if it looks yellowish, that means something as far as the taste is concerned. Now, is there anything to that kind of thinking? That now the wines are, you talk about white wine, but obviously a lot of them they aren't white looking. Mm-hmm. They do have a tint to them. And talk about that a little bit.
There's several things.
If you can tell a difference by the color, I guess I'm saying.
My experience is that the only thing that you can really tell by looking at the color of a white wine in a glass is what color it is. because different kinds of grapes, for example, the Viognier and the Sauvignon Blanc have slightly different color juice. So the wine would be slightly different color. Then a lot of people here who have drank Chardonnay have probably noticed that some Chardonnays taste very oaky or have a very heavy vanilla taste to them. And the way they make those oaky Chardonnays is they age them in a barrel, and the inside of the barrel has been charred by fire to bring out the vanilla taste. And some of the color from the oak in the barrels will leach, the color will leach into the wine. So you could have a very nice, rich, oaky tasting Chardonnay that has a heavy yellow color to it. And you could have another Chardonnay that was made in a stainless steel that wouldn't have that same color, but they would both be good, sound bottles of wine. The other thing that can make a wine turn yellow or brownish would be if it's exposed to air. If the cork leaks and air gets in and starts turning it to vinegar. So the only way you can really tell if a wine is good is by tasting it.
Tasting it.
And sometimes if a Chardonnay, which can age for quite some time, an older wine will take on that darker hue. But again, you can't tell if it's improved with age or whether it's gone downhill until you taste it.
Okay, that leads me, I guess it's something I meant to ask you earlier. When you open a bottle of wine, is it a benefit as far as the taste is concerned to leave it open for a while after you take out the cork, or what difference is there, if any?
With most wines,
talk about reds first,
Yeah.
or I guess if there is a difference.
Red wines, it's more noticeable, but young red.
And when
wines,
you say noticeable, I want you to explain that a
okay,
little bit.
yeah, young red wines have a chemical in it called tannin, which is a natural product of the skins of the grapes. It's the same chemical that they use in the tanning process for making shoes and leather belts and so forth. And sometimes red wines, especially older red wines, will have a kind of a leathery taste to them. If you open a bottle of red wine, the best thing to do is to pour out about half a glass, which lets some air get into the bottle and sort of mixes it with the wine. And if you let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes after you open it and pour some out, the wine in the bottle will, some of that mustiness or some of the leathery, taste, mouthfeel will dissipate. The other advantage to pouring that half a glass of wine is it gives you an opportunity to taste the wine and see if the wine tastes proper for whatever kind of grape it is. If it tastes mildewed, or if it tastes muddy or like a barnyard, the bottle may be bad. And if you're going to do this for a dinner party, if you taste that first taste and it tastes awful, you might want to get another bottle and open a second bottle and have that ready, because the first one probably isn't going to improve that much.
Just as an aside, have you ever had occasion to return a bottle at a restaurant when you felt it didn't taste properly?
I've done it a few times.
Have you?
Yeah.
And what's the reaction been, or what have you told the waiter when that happens?
Usually I tell them it tastes corked, which means that there's a mildew that gets into the corks of during the cork making process, and after the cork and the wine have been in contact for a while, that mildew gets into the wine, and if you've tasted it, you can usually remember and you taste it again. I'll tell the waiter if I think there's a specific flaw, like it tastes corked, I'll tell the waiter that, or the sommelier. And most good restaurants, they'll take it back without question. And
do you think they taste it in the back room themselves to see if you?
Some have, because I've asked the sommelier when they brought the replacement bottle out. I says, did you agree with me that it was corked? And sometimes he'll say, I haven't tried it yet. But I have had guys say, yes, sir, it was. The other, in a nice, good restaurant, if it's a busy restaurant, you can sometimes get away with telling them, even if the wine isn't flawed, you could say, well, this isn't what I expected, and sometimes they'll take it back.
Oh, really?
And as that works especially if you've depended on the waiter or the sommelier's advice for, what wine should we have with this, and he recommends a Chateau, nose in the air from France, and you say, well, this doesn't really taste like what I thought it was going to taste like from your description. They'll usually take it back and recommend a replacement, but it's not good form to send a wine back if it's just not what you thought it was. That's sort of on you as the consumer for not having had the right expectations. But good restaurants, ones with white tablecloths, equivalent of Fireside, for example, they'll probably take it back if you don't like it.
Now, I've been told we just have a few more moments here. I noticed you brought some bottles here, and just briefly, is there any? Does the size and shape of a bottle mean anything to to the guy if I'm buying a bottle of wine? What does it mean, if anything?
Well,
Very briefly.
in the old days, the shape of the bottle was an indication of what kind of wine it is, and to some degree today, the bottles with the very distinctive shoulders on them is a Bordeaux bottle, and the wines that are in there are more the style of the Bordeaux wines, the Cabernet Sauvignon, the Merlot. In France, in Italy, that would be the Bardolino, Barolo. In Spain, from the Toro region. The bottles with the sloped shoulders is a Burgundy bottle, and that's supposed to mean that the wine in there is more in the style of Burgundy, more like Pinot Noir or Petit Syrah or Shiraz. There's so many wines being made around the world now that a lot of times they just put it into whatever bottles are available, and the shape of the bottle, the only shape of the bottle that really means anything are the tall, slender bottles that the German wines come in. Those wines around the world still pretty much tend to be more sweet wines, things like Blue Nun or Liebfraumilch and Riesling. Usually, if you want a sweeter wine and you don't know anything else about it, if you get something that's in that shape of a bottle, you have a better chance of finding one that's the style that you like.
Yeah, very good. Well, very fine, Jim. Thank you very, very much. I thought that was a very, very nice explanation of a number of things as far as wine is concerned. Now, let's talk a little bit about what